In the fifth and final interview of the Lightweight Rowing podcast series, I sit down with Stanford women's lightweight head coach, Kate Bertko. In the previous episode, we heard from Peter Antonie, who went from competing as a lightweight to competing as a heavyweight. Kate will be sharing her rowing career and how she transitioned from a heavyweight to a lightweight and having outstanding success in both weight classes. Kate took her experience from her athletic career and has immediately translated that to success on the coaching front with the Stanford women's lightweight rowing program, which has resulted in 3 consecutive titles at the IRA National Championship. Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast, a podcast focused on scientific and real-world expertise on training strategies between your ears, behind the oar handle, on the field and court, and in the strength and conditioning room. I'm your host, Joe DeLeo. I am a strength and conditioning coach, speaker, and lifelong student focused on continuous improvement. Thank you for joining me, and let's roll to today's episode. I am thrilled to welcome onto the Leo Training Podcast head coach of the Stanford University Women's Lightweight Rowing Program, Kate Bertko. Kate, thank you so much for taking the time to come out of your busy coaching schedule and come onto the show and share your coaching and athletic experience with the rowing community.
Yeah, I'm pumped to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, it's an honor to have the time to sit down and speak with you. So we've got a great interview in store for the audience. You competed as both an open weight and lightweight rower. So you've got an incredible amount to offer the audience. So there's going to be a ton of knowledge and gold nuggets I'm sure they'll be able to take away and integrate into their own training. So to kick things off, you graduated from Princeton in 2006 as an open weight and segued onto the U.S. national team. So could you just kind of explain to the audience as you wrapped up your collegiate career and transitioned onto the U.S. team, what those first few years were like and what your focus was?
Yeah, sure. After graduating, I was actually coaching at Cal the year after I graduated, and I realized that coaching was fun. I was having such a great time, but I really missed racing, and I really wanted to get back into it. And I felt like I had some unfinished questions about my top speed that I wanted to take a look at. And so I'm a little shorter and I wasn't a super powerful open weight. And so at that point, the way to get the attention of the national team coaches was through sculling. So I moved up to Seattle and started to learn how to scull up there. And by the end of that year, it was the Beijing Olympics had happened, and Tom was inviting a new group of women to the Princeton Training Center. And that's how I got in to the Princeton Training Center and got cooking along with probably the most sort of ferocious and terrific group of women out there. They're really fun. That's awesome.
So previously, had you had any sculling experience during college? No.
Yeah, I had rowed a pair twice, and that was the extent of my small boat, blind boat experience. So the single was a rude awakening for me.
So you were primarily in the 4 and the 8 then?
Yeah, I pretty much just rode the 8. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that had to be a big transition and definitely a little bit of a learning curve switching from sweep to sculling and everything. So what was that like that first year?
Yeah, it was. I was really terrible. I think I flipped my single 5 times in the first year. It was, in Seattle it gets pretty cold in the winter. So flipping in the winter is not super fun. But also, coming from a collegiate system where a lot of things are handled for you, like sort of learning to handle all your own equipment, your nutrition, your training, and sort of learning the skill set to move a small boat. That was a big transition for me. But I actually really love the single. It gives you a ton of feedback. It's very honest. You can kind of throw yourself into it. So that ended up being pretty fun. But I don't really feel like I ever became a good single sculler. It just became a project that I really enjoyed. And it took, like 100 years of sculling for me to really start to understand how to move the single properly and not just, like kind of manhandle the poor thing.
Right. What would be a piece of advice you would give to a college rower who had sort of had a similar trajectory where they hadn't had a lot of sculling experience, but wanted to continue to row and had primarily done sweep during their 4 years in college?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think, I'm always a big fan of sort of the pull hard drill, like learning how to push yourself and pull hard and, kind of get after it is very awesome and fun and cool. The single, when you're learning to row the single or any sculling boat, sort of requires putting some of that intensity and attention into technique. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn because I just wanted to mash on it. And that is not rewarded in small boats. And so taking your effort and intensity into percentages. Like when you're starting the single, it's going to be 80% rowing properly, 20% pushing, right? And then as you get better, you can get closer to 100% of just, like redlining that sucker. But in the beginning process, learning to properly position and row the boat is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. And get a GPS or get a stroke coach so you can see what you're doing and how that impacts the speed of the boat.
Awesome. Okay, so training up in Seattle, relocated to the Princeton Training Center in Princeton, New Jersey. So what happened between Beijing and then into 2009? So I'm guessing made your kind of home base in Princeton, New Jersey, training it there in that area. And you were focusing primarily in the sculling events. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was just almost always sculling. You join this big group of athletes. It would train out of Princeton, and we take a training trip to Chula Vista. But we're under Tom Terhar. You're learning a lot from the coaches, but also from like the opportunity to really train with people who are really going after it, and that is pretty transformative. Like if you look at just metrics, like I completely like smashed all of my erg PRs. I think I really had to learn how to scull because people would just, they'll beat you if you don't focus. So I got into it, and 2009 I made the quad that year. I was stroking the quad, and that was really fun.
Awesome. So I have a question. So I looked up a lot of your results on your profile on World Rowing and USRowing, and then some articles I could find both on Stanford University and Princeton. And so in 2009, it had a World Rowing Cup in Lucerne, World Cup 3, and it had you racing the women's quad and then the women's 8 as well.
Right. Yeah. Actually, yeah. Yeah, so, that was an exciting World Cup.
Right. So my question is, so what's the backstory with that?
I was intended to race the quad. World Cup 3 was my first international competition, part of the U.S. team. I was so super freaking psyched, to be on the team. And we got to Lucerne. Lucerne is beautiful. The race course is amazing. It's probably one of the greatest places to row. And a number of people on the team became very sick. So we were kind of like trying to figure out what boats we were going to be able to race. I think we were practicing in doubles. There was some talk of going out in the quad with just 3 people in it. And then the sickness also impacted the sweep group. So I was a starboard, or I had a background as a starboard. And the coaches said, hey, you take the bus to the race course. They're like, hey, get on this bus to the race course for the finals on Sunday. Because I think we just at Lucerne, if there's like only enough boats for the finals, you only race the final, but you get put in an outside lane or something. Like we were just doing finals only for the quad and the 8. Right, get on the bus in the morning. When you arrive at the course, we'll tell you if you're rowing the quad or rowing the 8, which is like kind of short notice, but, wow. And I I hadn't been sweeping a lot at that point, and I also was like a relatively new sculler and very new to like towing a quad, so I was pretty nervous about steering down like a buoyed course. So they're like very, very nervous about both of those options. And then so I got to the course, and I was in the 8, and I was in 2 seat of the 8, and bow seat of the 8 was Erin Cafaro, like Olympic gold medalist from Beijing at that point, and like my personal hero. So I am like super nervous to be rowing in front of Erin Cafaro. We race, and I'm like so jacked to race that I kind of like went out way too hard in the first 500. Like I'm used to sculling where there's like a little bit more of a technical component. And I just remember Cafaro was like, like, you got it. Like, keep your head up. Cause I was just totally blacking out in the first quarter of the race. So that I just swept at that regatta. And it was, nothing after that was quite that chaotic, but, of course we had like very professional coaches to handle it, and everyone on the team is super professional, but it was very exciting in a way. Wow.
That's incredible. So like, I guess a good analogy would be like coming up to pinch hit in the 9th, right? So you're, like, cause it was totally unplanned and not expected, and being asked to do that because the sickness had hit the team.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I would be considered a pinch hitter, but Cafaro still speaks to me to this day. So after watching my horrible sweeping at that regatta, she still talks to me, which is great.
Well, that's very cool. That's an incredible experience. And I mean, and the result, you ended up taking a silver at the 3rd World Cup, right?
Yeah. We got a silver, which, for the 8 is not this, they typically win, but, so it might have been me on that day, but, I think it was good for the scenario.
Well, I mean, anytime you walk away with a medal is a positive thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So next question. So we're working our way through, the 09 to 2012 quadrennium. So you wrap up 09. So take us through the next couple years of training, and how that's looking in 2010 and 2011.
Yeah. So kind of got into it at that point. You're training, you're sort of banging heads with your teammates. I rode the openweight double 2010 and 2011 with 2 different doubles partners. And 2000 we did okay. Not amazing, never got into the medals at a world championship. And then unfortunately in 2011, we had sort of a tough world championship, and that's the Olympic qualifier. And we missed qualifying the boat class for the London Olympics by 1 spot. And I take a lot of responsibility for how I sort of handled that pressure situation. I don't think that was my best mental or physical performance. And it was pretty heartbreaking to, have a job to do for the team and for the country, and like not achieve that goal by 1 spot.
Yeah, that's going to be very, very difficult. So how do you, taking that result and moving forward into the Olympic year, how do you kind of refocus and recalibrate after that? Like what were some of the things you did, in the lead up to London?
Well, I was pretty fired up because I was very frustrated with the result. I think my mental approach to London was not perfect, and it was quite different from my mental approach to Rio. But I was young and like sort of still trying things on for size, but I was frustrated. I was pretty fired up. I think I function pretty well when I'm a little bit annoyed or angry. And so I sort of threw myself into training and sort of went after it. I was like, well, this is like, I haven't put myself in a good position. So you have to throw in the kitchen sink at that point. And I started just, getting myself prepared for what I knew would be a very challenging year.
Okay. So, from there, you're progressing through, the lead up to London. So still continuing to focus on, the sculling boats. So take us through kind of the lead up into London and the selection process.
Yeah. So still in sculling. That was going to be my thing. 2012 became a little bit complicated for me. Starting in early 2011, I started to notice that my heart rate was starting to run pretty high during workouts, like in the 200s. And I had been diagnosed with an arrhythmia in college and fought pretty hard for what I considered to be an incorrect diagnosis, because they diagnosed me with something that it's an self-terminating arrhythmia. And they said I couldn't row anymore. And I sort of fought that because I had never experienced any runs of high heart rate. And, but then, in 2010, 2011, I really started to see it happening. And by February of 2012, it was becoming really intense, for hours at a time through a whole workout, holding the heart rate. My heart rate would just sort of sit around 200, 210, 220. And I was pretty spooked to bring it up because I knew how doctors tend to react to that in athletes. And ultimately got to a point where I couldn't complete an erg workout because it was too painful. I stopped. We were at Chula Vista at the training center there at the time, and this was in January of 2012, mid-January. And I stopped, and at that point, I was definitely not cleared to be training with the group. And I flew back to the East Coast and was, very, very lucky. I was able to be, seen by a group of doctors at NYU. They have a heart rhythm center there, and a geneticist who from Italy, actually. And ultimately, they diagnosed me with something very simple, atrial fib. And I was able to have an EP study where you can sort of locate where the arrhythmia is coming from, and an ablation at the same time in the end of February. So I had that and was back at the Chula Vista Training Center about 2 weeks later. So I got very lucky with doctors who are willing to be pretty thoughtful about managing sort of my time in that. Olympic trials for the double were at the end of March. So I got back to the training center. We did some double selection, and my doubles partner and I won Olympic trials in the double, and it was non-qualified trials. So for the double and the single for the women, these were boats that had not qualified through the World Championship the previous year and would have to go to the qualification regatta at Lucerne in the summer to try to qualify the event and people for the Olympics. And at that time, my doubles partner and I was interested in the double. We both were concerned about how that qualification process in Lucerne would go. And so for a variety of reasons that I think, I somewhat regret now. We declined the double spot to go into quad selection, and the quad for the U.S. is a camp boat. So it would not go, and it was qualified, so it would not go through that last chance regatta. So we declined that. We joined the quad camp, and went through a number of months of selections. We raced at 2 World Cups, and then unfortunately, or I guess unfortunately is the wrong word, but in, I think, July, in the last round of seat racing for the quad for London, I lost seat race and was cut. So that was a tough year for me. And it was pretty heartbreaking. I genuinely felt quite heartbroken by that.
Yeah. I mean, just all the things that you had overcome throughout the last few years, but especially that year, overcoming the atrial fibrillation, just, it sounds like 4 to 6 weeks out from the doubles trial. March.
Yeah.
So, but things are, obviously, I mean, it sounds like you got to figure it out, but things are good now for you with your heart, if you don't mind me asking.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's an awesome surgery. They did a great job, and, there's a period, atrial fib can come back. But I felt good since then. So it's been great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, that I've read and come across literature, and then it seems to be a condition that, please correct me if I'm wrong. rowers seem to kind of be at a little bit of a higher propensity at, just because the high amount of, cardiovascular training we do in the sport, and the development of the heart. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And, I couldn't speak intelligently about the actual statistics and like the prevalence of it among rowers compared to like, say, the normal population or like athletes. But my understanding of it is actually athletic training and conditioning can increase your likelihood to have it. And I think the studies are complicated because they're mostly done on men and mostly done on older men, but that is my understanding is yes, like when you condition your heart in this way, you can be more likely to have atrial fib if you are predisposed to that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something I'll have to look into more, because I remember, I think it was, I can't remember if it was 2008 or 2012, but I remember when Rob Waddell had come back from New Zealand. That was something that he was dealing with when he was going through trials against Mahe Drysdale as well. Okay. So, so after London, I believe heading into 2013, at some point you made a decision to move from the open weight category to lightweight. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So what prompted your decision and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I wasn't planning to come back to rowing. I thought I was done. And when I started to make the decision to get back into it, I felt like if I tried to do the same thing, I was going to get the same result. And so I wanted to give myself the boat category that I would remove as much need for luck out of the selection process of making the Olympics, if that makes sense. Like, instead of hoping that things go my way, I wanted to put myself in a place where I would be pretty sure I would get it done if I was very diligent about the training and the nutrition and the racing. And so the lightweight double for the U.S. is it's a trials boat, so you get selected to the team based on a race. And I really like that. And it's actually for the lightweight double, it's a pretty long race. It's one of the longer races because it's a slower boat class, and I'm a little bit more of an endurance athlete. And I think I felt like if I just tried to go open weight again and do the same thing, I was going to get the same result, and that would make me feel insane.
Sure. No. And I love that you took ownership and you wanted control of your destiny.
Yeah, there's always an element of luck in athletics, but I wanted that to be as small as possible. No,
it sounds like, you did some real, thought and self-reflection and on what the right next steps for you would be.
Yeah.
So moving from, open weight to lightweight, right? So obviously there's a change in total body weight, diet, nutrition, sleep, training, right? So first question is, how did you, stepping back, making that decision, then what were sort of some of the smaller steps that you had to start planning in addition to the training? So how much weight did you have to get down to? And then how did you adjust your, diet, nutrition, and sleep so that you were making sure you were able to recover enough so you could continue to train at the proper volumes and intensities to get quality work in?
It was actually an interesting process because I wish I had been maybe not as particular, but more particular about my sleep and my nutrition when I was in open weight, because you really have to dial it in as a lightweight. I'm always a little hesitant to talk about this because I do not recommend this to many other people. Mm-hmm. I'm 5'9". I had to lose 30 pounds. I had to go to very low body fat to hit lightweight and to race at lightweight. And that was a decision I made when I was an adult. I think I was they're 29 or 30 when I did it. And so I was making a very informed decision about the consequences to my health when I did this. And I don't recommend dropping 30 pounds to most people. That is not, it was something I really wanted. I really wanted to race at the Olympics, but it was, it was not fun at times. But anyway, I really first just thought about, nutrition and how to tweak that. Really working on, eliminating, processed foods, sugars, starting to time my nutrition a little bit better. For a while I did kind of a paleo thing. That is not really a long-term solution for me, at least when I was doing that much training. I needed a little bit more calories at times, but, and then, I was fired up to give it another shot. And that always helps when prioritizing, do I need to go to bed or do I want to go out and hang out with my friends? And it ultimately, it's a very selfish pursuit. Any sort of elite athletics is pretty selfish. So, it can be a little bit, isolating in a way. And maybe lightweight rowing is sort of naturally isolating at times, but, it was fun at times too. I really got to push my body pretty hard.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Something you said there that I think is sort of very, very kind of telling and important, and talking about sort of how much more dialed in a lightweight rower has to be, right? So,
totally.
I think open weight and lightweight, there's incredible athletes across the world in both of those categories, but the margin for error, to make mistakes is so much smaller on the lightweight scale, because you have to really be dialed in with your sleep, your diet, nutrition, because you're trying to hit certain intensities, certain numbers on the ergometer or in the boat speeds, but then at the same time you have to make weight, right?
Yep.
So really trying to optimize performance. So one of the big questions I have for you is as you kind of went through this process, what are some of the biggest lessons that you kind of learned, as you had to really, kind of examine, your diet and make sure you were getting the proper minerals and vitamins to make sure that you were recovering. But at the same time, losing 30 pounds, you had to be in some type of caloric deficit to get down the weight over time.
Well, I guess the question, maybe I can ask for a little redefinition, because what did I learn? What did I learn about nutrition or physiology, or what did I learn about handling that sort of mental, physical state?
I think both.
Okay.
So start off with the nutrition, right? Because I feel like you have to be you pay attention to it a lot more, because everything is, it's affecting you, so much more. You're that much more dialed in, as you said, meal to meal, day to day, throughout the year, making sure that you're getting the proper fuel you need. But then I guess the second part of that is as an athlete, you probably, my guess is you became so much more aware and in tune with, what you needed to get your body to respond well.
Yeah. So, nutritionally, or, just overall health wise, it definitely was, sort of self-experimentation in a way. And I think there's tons of information out there about nutrition. There's tons of stuff about how to lose weight, how to gain weight. Ultimately, I think everyone's a little bit unique and individual. And for me, it was playing around with things and finding a system that worked for me, physically and mentally, because there is certainly a mental component to managing weight in that way. And so, it took a lot of trial and error, and that means that things have to be monitored, in a way. It becomes a little bit annoying, because you're checking your weight, you're monitoring your food, you're recording things, you're monitoring your vitals in a way, and that can become very particular. And then separating that from who I was as a person, because that's, maybe not necessarily my normal personality, but I was able to sort of get into that because at that point I was like, hey, this is who I'm going to be as an athlete. And that means I have to be pretty on top of it. And so there's no one system that's going to work for anyone, but it really is finding things that make you feel good and that you can sort of manage long term. And then sort of managing that state, I think it's a kind of an interesting combination of two opposing things. Because in one way, I was paying a lot of attention to how things made me feel. Like, do I feel more tired in this state? I'm like, am I fussy? Am I grumpy? Do I feel like I can really jam on it? And then the other side of that is, when it's time to go, turning all of that off, right? Because the last thing you want to do in the middle of the race, being like, well, I'm like, I'm dehydrated and I'm a little bit hungry. Like, you kind of have to train yourself also to just like turn your brain off and give yourself no excuses. And those two things are like a little bit opposing. So I kind of have like my training state where I'm paying a lot of attention to like what's going on, how I feel, how I'm responding, and then a racing state where I'm just like going after it with no thought about what I've put in my body beforehand.
I love that. So how did you have a particular like routine, like in terms of getting ready for a race to, shut everything off, like block, any of those, that feedback or that voice, like, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, or, so you could just put the horse blinders on and focus on the race at hand?
Yeah, well, I think that the easy thing about racing is it's super scary, right? Like it's scary. There are big high stakes. You have your competition right there. You're nervous, and that makes it easy to focus in a way, right? Because when the stakes are high, when you're on the line and your competition is sort of right there, I always find that to be both terrifying and really fun. So that is one way that kind of helped me like switch into that state, like flip into that state. But also I think, routines are like super awesome and they're really good for making sure, like for me at least, for being in the right state, and if we want to talk about like lightweights being a little OCD, I'd have like a pretty detailed timetable, starting about, like 36 hours before my race of what was going to happen. What I was going to eat. Yeah. Like what I was going to eat, what I'm going to drink. Oh man. It like just starting with, if we go back in time, like, you get to the race, you get to the starting blocks, and then you're like kind of free of the timetable. You just get to race, but there's like your warm up I have all programmed in. Like, what am I going to do here? And like, when am I going to eat my next gel? Like I had a gel, like 20 minutes before I race, a gel an hour before I was going to race. I had the same recovery shake after every weigh-in, the same amount of caffeine, a pretty fussy amount of like electrolytes. And then leading into the weigh-in, kind of knowing how much I was going to have to, sweat in the morning, knowing what I was going to eat in the morning, and when I was going to wake up, I would have like my bags packed with lots of different clothing options depending on the weather. I would have like things to keep my hair dry. When I was going to go to sleep, it just how I was going to make my coffee. Like it just didn't get. You can go into like whole iterations of fussiness there, which I got into.
Yeah, but that's great because the amount of detail, right? Like all those little things that you're mentioning, they all add up clearly.
Totally. Yeah. And it would end up making me feel really calm on race day because instead of worrying about what I was supposed to be doing next, I would literally have it written down and have everything like packed in a sequential order in my bag, so I would know exactly what's coming next.
Do you think that goes back to kind of what you said earlier, like being able to do all those things that gave you that sense of ownership and control?
Yeah, probably. I think it's both sort of trying to take control of a very challenging, scary, adverse situation where you're going to be tested in a lot of different ways. So all of my sort of reserves of control, self-control, and effort would go into racing and not like wondering what I was doing next. So like sort of saving a reserve in that way. But then also like I would just get so freaking amped to race, and it would make me really nervous. So it was kind of like also like managing my own personal excitement by making sure I wasn't like running around like a headless chicken.
I love it. I could tell you get very, very fired up very, very quickly.
Yeah, totally.
That's awesome. Okay, so how long did it take you to get down to lightweight, like losing the 30 pounds? Like obviously that didn't happen, over a week, right? So you kind of stair stepped it over a few months, my guess is, if not more. Yeah,
and I honestly, I probably did it too fast. I think it took me about 4 months, which, technically that's kind of an okay time frame, but I think that might have been a little fast because I wasn't like overweight at the time. But yeah, it was a couple months.
Yeah, I did 2 years ago. I did the same thing. I went from 211 down to 180, and I went May 1st to like September 15th. So just over 4 months.
Yeah. You can do it. It's challenging.
Very. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the similar things that you touched on. I used Lose It, which is like a mobile app, and like Lava.
Okay. Yeah.
Every meal, and trying to make sure I was getting the proper amount of like protein. And it, for the first time, it really made me do a ton of reading on looking at how to properly try to, losing weight, but making sure that you're getting the proper amount of like protein, carbohydrate, and fat, all the macronutrients, remaining in a caloric deficit. And it's, it definitely, it makes you, like you said earlier, like a lot more informed about like what you're eating. And, you look at it and you're lucky, you can't believe sometimes how many calories are in certain foods.
Yeah, totally. And, I was not like I thought I was a healthy eater when I started looking at it, and I was like, oh man, like I ate a lot of candy that day. Like that's not a healthy amount of candy.
Okay. So about 4 months. So we're in the quadrennium of 2013 to 2016.
Yep.
So 2013, you rode the lightweight women's double with Kristin Hedstrom, and resulted in a silver medal at the 2013 World Championship. So what was your training like that year?
Yeah, that was a fun year. I was training, a lot of that I was in Oklahoma City at the training center there. So I got some good training there. At one point, one of the U.S. coaches, Chris Korzanowski, came out, and he kind of just broke it down. I did a lot of like rowing square blades, half blade buried in my single until I could figure out how to sequence properly, which was very frustrating for me because I was not very good at it. But yeah, so trained there, then met up with Kristin. She was in California in the Bay Area. We trained there for a bit. Some of it was just learning how to train at a different body weight. The boat sits a little differently as you lose weight. My body wasn't as like physically strong, so sort of adjusting my stroke a bit. But yeah, it was definitely a fun year. We had a good time, and it was really, for me, having been cut the year before, it was pretty cool to race at a world championship and get on the podium for the first time for me in a 2-person boat.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have to imagine that felt really good. Coming full circle like that and making such an incredible jump, losing 30 pounds over the course of a year and completely changing from open weight to lightweight. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, it was an eventful year.
Okay. So in 2014 and 2015, you rode the lightweight women's single.
Yep.
And so let's talk about those 2 years. Did you want to spend more time in the single, kind of just working on your stroke and getting more experience on the sculling side of things? Like what was the focus, during that time period?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was not intentional to row the single, even though I do love the single. The U.S. has a trial system for the double, and in 2014 and 2015, Kristin and I both lost that trial system race to the double of Michelle Sexer and Devery Karz. And at that point, I really wanted. I still wanted experience as a lightweight because, I'd only at that point raced 1 year as a lightweight, and the lightweight single seemed like a good way to, both learn how to scull better because the single is very, very honest, and then, work on how I manage my weight at regattas. So that's sort of the direction I went in there with the single.
Awesome. So what were some of the kind of the biggest takeaways for you during those 2 years, like especially I guess during the regatta, like learning, like just as you just said, learning to get to weight and manage your weight during the regatta week and weekend and everything. So was that really good practice for you to continue to kind of refine and dial in your routine?
Yeah, I think so. And then you're just on your own. So you can, I felt more empowered to sort of experiment a little bit, less so in 2014. 2014 was sort of a different situation, but when you don't have someone else depending on you to be very consistent, the single, you can kind of try out things because it's just your results on the line. I felt like that allowed me to, play around a little bit more, because if I messed it up, it's just on me. I don't have to, worry about that I've somehow been a jerk to someone else.
Sure. Okay. So take us through the lead up to the 2016 Rio Olympic Games.
I joined a group of lightweight women training out of Vesper in Philadelphia. And it was about, it was like eight or nine lightweight women there. And we kind of it was kind of a lightweight women's version of maybe what the training center is. Not as many people and not quite as structured, but it was really great to have a bunch of people racing, like trading pieces. We did a ton of pieces. Like we were doing just like pieces all the time. And that's how we, got a couple doubles out of that. Ultimately I was rowing with Devery Karz, who is a super awesome athlete, such a badass. And we raced trials. We're in Sarasota, Florida, and we raced trials and we won that. And we got named to the team in, I think, April.
That's awesome. That's very cool. So April, games are in August, right?
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah.
So, take us over the next, 4 months. You're in the double with Devery. What was the preparation like over the next few months to prepare for Rio?
Yeah, it was good and challenging. I don't think that we, how do I say this? I think Devery and I had the capacity to be faster when we got to Rio. I think some of the organization of our training and the organization of our weights throughout that year was not conducive to peaking at the Olympics. That's unfortunate. I can't go back in time and fix it. I certainly would if I could. But we raced a World Cup. I was very sick at the World Cup, so we weren't able to sort of complete the regatta. So we went into Rio with only Olympic trials as a full regatta together. It was, good training, lots of tough racing, but it was not, I think we had sort of peaked for trials, and we had been at weight for a long time before that. And, as a taller lightweight, I'm a little bit better training, a little bit above weight. So it was a tough training block, maybe not perfectly done. And I think we had some, we didn't totally jive with our coach. And that can be a challenge also.
So, one of the questions I had for you was like one of the biggest things in the news for Rio was the talk about the water and the conditions of the water and I guess the health effects of that. So was that something that played a little bit of even greater effect, especially because you're trying to maintain or make weight. And that's like another consideration on top of everything else that you're trying to do.
Yeah, well, so the water, like the water quality can be defined in a couple different ways. We never got sick from the water, right? So the water was being tested on a daily basis, and it was pretty clean, but it was very windy and bouncy, and that actually had a bigger impact on us. I think we ended up having to do, because they would. We'd weigh in, and then they would cancel the racing for the day because of wind. We ended up doing sort of 6 consecutive weigh-ins. So weighing in every day for 6 days at Rio, and most of the time you're only weighing in 2 to 4 times in a regatta with a day off in between for a world championship. You do 3 times in a row for a World Cup, but 6 was a lot, and for me that was definitely a challenge. Devery super professional. I think we tried to handle it as best we could have, but that's a bunch of weigh-ins.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a ton.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Man. Okay, so you go through the regatta at the Rio Olympics with Devery, complete the regatta, and very, very shortly after the regatta, you are named as the head coach for the Cardinal Lightweight Women on September 9th, 2016. So were you, as you were going through training leading up to Rio, were you already thinking about transitioning into coaching? Is that something you had in the back of your mind, or, what led you to take that next step, going from being an athlete full-time to coaching full-time?
Yeah, I definitely have been thinking about it. It was something I was really interested in. I had coached for a year at Cal after I graduated from Princeton, and that was really fun. And I had some terrific coaches in high school and college, and some terrific national team coaches, and it really helped me develop as a human being. And I think it's a really interesting and cool way to teach life skills. And you also get to be outdoors and on the water, and racing is really fun and exciting. So it was something I was interested in, and I got my high school coach, Derek Burns, who's now the open weight women's coach at Stanford, let me know that there was an opening on the lightweight side, and that was a pretty compelling job for me. That's
awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And you've had tremendous success very, very quickly. I mean, in your first 2 seasons, you won the IRA National Championship in the lightweight women's 8.
Yes, actually, technically we've won the team championship as well twice. Yes.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Well, we have a sort of a team focused approach, and I think a lot of people put a lot of work into getting those. So I have to give everyone a shout out.
Yeah, no, of course. Absolutely. I mean, it is the ultimate team sport. So let's talk about that a little bit more, if that's okay with you, in greater detail. I mean, so what have each of those seasons been like? And what are some of the things that you've kind of tried to instill into, the culture at Stanford when you took over the reins?
Yeah, it's the first year for me personally was a little bit like drinking from the fire hose. So that it was a lot of learning new things. Like every day was sort of a new adventure. But the cool thing is that the team already had a really strong, sort of strong dynamic culture and really good leadership within the group of women. And that actually, I could talk about, this is what I did for the team, but, honestly, coming from probably 10 years in athletics, being in elite athletics is a very selfish pursuit. And I sort of say this in a technical way, right? Like, you're spending a lot of time thinking about yourself. I certainly was spending a lot of time thinking about myself. And then getting into the sport again, but through this very team focused group, it almost gave me a new love for the sport. And I had almost forgot what it was like to be in a team or on a team that where people were genuinely really watching out for each other and supporting each other and building each other up. And that at the end of the day, those relationships, between the women on the team and, hopefully always between myself and the women on the team, are ultimately the most important thing. And so that was, for that first year, that just was super transformational for me. It like kind of made me love the sport again. And that first year, there were lots of ups and downs. I made a ton of mistakes, but the women on the team were very patient with me, and it was awesome. And then we're kind of trying to build from there over the next couple of years. Keeping that like relationship oriented approach to team building sort of focused on and alive.
That's outstanding. Isn't it amazing how energizing or potentially like detracting a culture can be on a team?
Absolutely. And it's everything.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's probably one of the hardest things to get right, because it's like, it's not something that's quantifiable, like, especially if, in rowing, we're always looking at like, your cadence and your split and your watts and, your heart rate. Right. So it's like, you have these very objective measurements, but how does one measure, positivity and culture and enthusiasm, energy in an environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
So that's awesome. That's outstanding. So, I believe, you're also doing some work. You've been working with the heavyweight women's double on the U.S. team, Megan O'Leary and Ellen Tomek. Yeah,
they moved out to I'm sorry, where am I? They moved out to Palo Alto. It's mid last year, and Sarah Trowbridge is actually my doubles partner from 2011. So I've known Sarah for a long time. We rowed in the quad in 2009, and she's their primary coach. But since they're like sort of rowing out of our boathouse, it's been pretty fun to go out with them. They are both very talented athletes, and then they approach the process in a really cool way. So that, it's almost been like a gift for me.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Well, yeah, I had the opportunity to interview Megan, I believe it was last fall. Yeah, last fall. Mm-hmm. That was a great interview and stuff. So paying close attention to them, super excited for them in the lead up to Tokyo, and definitely continuing to send them all the positive energy and best wishes. So,
yeah.
Very
yeah,
cool.
They have their approach is great. They're very talented.
Yes, for sure. So let's talk a little bit. I have some kind of rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and we can come at this both from sculling and sweep. So what's your top sort of technical tip or drill for a sweep and sculling athlete?
This is not unique to myself. It's kind of well known, but for both disciplines, how you're sitting on the seat, like where are your sit bones? Are you tucked under? Are you hinging forward properly? So it's not even a drill. It's just checking it out and paying attention to how you're sitting on the seat.
Yeah. Proper awareness in how you're positioned.
Yep. Yeah. And I was I didn't sit on my seat properly until my last year of rowing. So that's why I try to get people doing it early on.
What is your favorite training session? It could be on the erg or on the water or strength and conditioning.
Oh, for myself or for my athletes?
Oh, both.
Oh, for myself, I'm a big fan of the hour piece for best split. I like long distance rowing. Or when I was training 1 year in the single, I was training with Carlos Dinierez, and our sort of staple workout was 20K for time, and that was in the single, and that gets gnarly really quickly. It's unique. And I think for athletes, the erg isn't easy. I would prefer to coach them on the water, but 2x6K on the erg, you learn a lot about your physiology, and I think you learn a lot about yourself. There's always a moment of crisis in 2x6K, and I think it's always a good one to do to get a check-in on how you're doing mentally and physically.
For sure. What's your 2K PR?
As an open weight, 6:48, and as a lightweight, 7:04, I believe.
Okay. What type of training session do you recommend that an athlete do as they're continuing to develop? So, for example, as you completed your collegiate rowing career, you segued from sweep to sculling, right? So if you're in that kind of transition phase, and you're an athlete that's going to continue to pursue rowing, or you're going from high school to college, what's something you feel is like really important they do to continue to develop as an athlete and as a rower?
I wish I had done this earlier, but yoga. Especially if you're going to small boats, and especially if you're going into sculling, like figuring out what your body parts are, figuring out how to move them slowly and carefully and independently of each other, so that when your coaches give you feedback on the water, you know what they're talking about. And then having that sort of like cycle of introspection and self-awareness and feedback for yourself, so you can sort of self-coach and then really interpret your coach's feedback. So yoga for the win. Right
on. What's your best advice for lightweight rowers to make weight?
Oh boy. Well, there's lots of ways to do that, but I always think it's important to be really honest about what you actually weigh. So weigh, especially as you're coming into the sort of the month preceding a regatta, weigh yourself in the evening and then weigh yourself in the morning. So you know what your weight, how your weight is fluctuating overnight, and you're having really honest tracking of your weight going into a regatta.
Great. Okay. Sort of two like kind of bigger questions from a like sport perspective, right? Like total sport. So
sure.
If you were to sit down and have a conversation with FISA and the IOC, what would be your recommendation to them to keep lightweight rowing in the sport past 2020?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think when we're looking at the Olympics, or why people are interested in the Olympics, or why people are interested in watching sports at that level, sort of in any discipline or in any competition, it's always because it is so fascinating to see people excel in adverse environments, right? Like how people are able to do that and how people are able to make it look effortless. That is captivating to folks. And yes, there are valid concerns with lightweight rowing, but you're really getting there with that version of the sport. It is not just a hard sport. It is a hard version of a hard sport. So that is always going to be compelling to folks. And because there are, fewer Olympic opportunities for lightweights, typically lightweight racing is the most tight racing of the regatta. And that's always fun to watch. So that's my personal reason for enjoying lightweight rowing. I don't know if FISA would agree with that, but I mean, sports are captivating because we see, extreme environments really push people, or sort of extreme mental duress push people to their best, and lightweight rowing creates that environment pretty quickly.
I love that. I love it. So what would you recommend, or what are some thoughts you have or suggestions to keep rowing progressing and evolving as a sport, like past 2020? So, like, for example, do you think that we need to keep the sport at the current Olympic distance of 2,000 meters? Or do we need to potentially make it more interesting and do a different distance as well? One thing I guess, I've heard several different athletes at different times say, but it can be not the best spectator sport, right?
Right.
So how do we try to make rowing more appealing sort of to the masses? Because I'm sure you would agree, it has a ton to offer. And it's so many life skills can be kind of drawn and learned from it. So anyway, so with that, so what are some recommendations you have to continue for the sport to progress and evolve?
Yeah, I think I'm a little conflicted on this because I think sometimes rowing, it can be cool because it is not that popular. So you're doing this for a really personal reason. You're not doing it for any sort of particular amount of attention. But I do understand that that's living in fantasy land a little bit. I think John Graves, I hope I'm crediting this correctly. John Graves at one World Championship was talking about having different distances to it, which I think would be really awesome, where you have like a 500 meter, 1,000 meter, like maybe a 2K, maybe a 20K. And then actually you maybe don't even have different weight categories. You have the single, you have the 8, maybe you have a pair or a double. And then, people sort of, it's like more like track and field. You're going to do the distance in the boat category that is the most conducive to your body size. I would love that because I personally wish there was an Olympic distance for rowing of the 20K. But that would be fun. Like the 500 meter is obviously going to be more exciting to spectators.
Yeah, totally. No, it's interesting. I interviewed Mads Rasmussen from Denmark, and Mads had a very similar suggestion, and it was to do a longer distance because it would level the playing field a little bit more in terms of total power output between a heavyweight and lightweight, and you would probably see a lot of the lightweights win. Yeah, you're gonna have. You don't even need to really have any weight category at that point because body efficiency. You can just sort of machine it at that point, and you just put a camera really close to someone's face over 20K and watch it crumple, and that could be interesting. That's awesome. That's awesome. That'd be a great suggestion for rowing is to have that up close. Put a GoPro right there. That'd be cool. GoPro in your face. Yeah, everyone will love that. I love it. Okay, I got a couple more for you. Sure. So, what are any particular exercises on the strength and conditioning front you felt were particularly helpful or had good transference over to the rowing stroke, or provided good benefit in terms of injury resilience? Yeah, I mean, I think you have to develop strength to get to this point, but I really felt like any sort of cleaning motion, like Olympic clean or power clean, really helped me actually learn how to sequence the rowing stroke. The grip is important there, and then it's sort of using your hips to get weight moving. Really, really changed the way I thought about rowing. But I'm not a strong person naturally, and I had to work my way into that motion. I was pretty bad at cleans when I first started. But I think one of the key takeaways there is in terms of the sequencing, like you're talking about, it is a highly technical, proficient, weightlifting movement. So once you kind of get that, the weight will come, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Totally. Totally. So I think that speaks a lot to what you were talking about there in terms of helping the athlete learn the sequencing. But you get to do it in a little bit of a different environment, and you can be in some ways a lot more hands-on than you can in the boat. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you can sort of work on talking about hip positioning or sit bone positioning. You have to work on that for the clean, work on grip, thinking about sort of what's going to be loose in your body, what's going to be engaged. And I think the clean kind of is the moneymaker for it. Excellent. I love it. What book would you recommend anyone read? That's a great question. For beach reading or for getting better at rowing? Oh, both. Yeah. I mean, you gotta have a pleasure book, right? I get teased all the time that everything I read is training, coaching, physiology related. I need to do something that's has nothing to do with, the full-time job, right? Yeah. Well, a personal favorite of mine, and I think it actually can be sort of related to how you approach life and athletics. Barbarian Days. It's about surfing. It's just a really interesting,
look at how sports can transform us and how like being engaged with the process of like learning about yourself and sports and being scared and being, like in nature can sort of change your life. It's real. I think it's an amazing book. I think the guy's William Finnegan. And then I actually just gave this book to my team, and I probably one or two of them have actually read it. But Touching the Void is a book about climbing, and it's a pretty gnarly book. It's two climbers, and one has to cut the rope on his partner. And I would read it sometimes at races when I was feeling very nervous or stressed out, because it would give me a good sense of perspective that what I was doing was not that hard. So that's a pretty crazy book.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
I'll have to check those two out. Very good.
Yeah.
Final question for you. So if you could go back in time and speak to yourself 10 years ago, what's one piece of advice that you would give to yourself?
Oh man, that's a good question. Well, I would tell myself to go to yoga more often. But I think it would be a little bit about managing my emotional state. I have an Irish temper that can get a little bit away from me at times, and I think it took me a long time to learn how to be passionate about the sport, but not let the positive and negative emotions sort of keep me from progressing. Like I would get pretty wrapped up in my positive races and my negative races. So if I could learn that skill set earlier, like maybe when I was in high school, that would be rad. But that speaking about managing my state, keeping the highs and lows sort of balanced out, and realizing that I think sports performance is not related to who you are as a human being. It took me a long time to learn that one too.
Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful advice. So I have to ask, because that's something that I know as an athlete I was very bad at. I did not do a good job with it myself, and I like a lot of the responses you've given, because I would say an equally fiery temper, but it's probably more on the Italian side of things. So,
yeah.
So how did you get better at that? Like, what are some of the things you worked on or did to improve on that?
I think part of it is I would get pretty negative feedback from it, right? I thought that, I would get really pissed off or fired up, and I wouldn't get any faster. It would take me forever. Like I would just be all wrapped up in these emotions. But honestly, and this is very, very cliche, but being cut from London and having basically the worst thing happen to me, like that was like, this is my nightmare. Like I'm so bummed out about this. It was so rough for me that it kind of forced me to reevaluate my entire process. And it was almost like a slap in the face to stop doing these dumb things. And that every time I sort of went through another sort of low point, it was a reminder to stay humble and reevaluate how I was doing things. And that actually, you kind of practice it and get better at it. But I wasn't very introspective about my emotions until I was cut, essentially, and realized that everything I was doing, like these behaviors, were not productive. Yeah.
That's great. Do you think that having those types of experiences, obviously they not only provide the perspective, but like in some ways, like without having them, like we can't sort of step back and have that kind of global perspective, because we're so sometimes like in the weeds.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, it's very trendy now to talk about how failure is a good thing, but when you've just failed, if it does not feel that way, like it feels pretty terrible. But there's no way to find success in life or to understand what that is even going to look and feel like to yourself as an individual or myself as an individual without experiencing the other side of that, right? Like everything has a good side and a bad side. Even success has a bad side. And it still bothers me to think about being cut in 2012, or bothers me to think about, I mean, I can remember every single race I've lost, but it really sets up that we are, like, I think it sets up how I go through life now, and it has informed how I made decisions and how I've become an adult. And ultimately, I wouldn't want it to be any other way, because it does create perspective.
That's wonderful advice. I will be sure to listen to this part of our chat again. No, seriously, I mean that. I mean that sincerely, for sure. Because I think that's wonderful advice, and that's something. It's a process. I never feel like I've got it figured out. Like I'm always kind of still working on it. So I know that will be something that is quite helpful to other people as well. So I appreciate you, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, and of course, it's very easy for me to talk about it in January of the season when, like, we're not racing, and I get really wound up in races. So of course, I am not perfect at this process by any means. But I think everything is a practicable skill. Like pain tolerance is a practicable skill. Like dealing with ups and downs is very practicable. So like the more it happens, essentially, the more you get practice at it.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's a skill and it's practicable. I love that. Awesome. Okay, well, Kate, you're off the hot seat.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. If this content is important to you, please be sure to rate and review so more people can listen. Also, you may follow me on social media, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook to get weekly free content. For more in-depth content, please subscribe to my email newsletter at my website, leotraining.io. Be sure to check out the resources page to download free, helpful content. If you have any questions or feedback, please contact me directly by email at joe@leotraining.io or via Instagram. The handle is @leotraining. Thank you again for listening, and have a great day.